Today, I will share a chilling story about the secret practices behind the sudden wealth of certain high-ranking officials. A story involving occult rituals and forbidden wealth. But before we begin, I encourage you to write blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad. May these blessings stand as witnesses for us and help us receive his intercession on the Day of Judgment. Liking and subscribing to this channel greatly supports the spread of Islamic teachings and becomes a continuous charity that benefits us even after we're gone, God willing. Aska was no ordinary ghost hunter. He was widely known in the supernatural community as a reckless, skeptical man, daring to venture where even local shamans were reluctant to go. He was tall and thin, with eyes that were always sharply observing his surroundings. An infrared camera, a sound recorder, and a temperature scanner were his weapons every time he entered a haunted location. And that night, his steps led him to a remote village on the outskirts of central Java, right at the edge of a dense forest that the locals called Alas Selo Domes. According to local stories, the forest held a dark secret. It was said that during the era of ancient kingdoms, the forest was a place for wealth-seeking rituals. Not just any ritual, but the most horrifying kind. Human sacrifices, blood pacts, and the summoning of beings from other dimensions took place there. And once every 100 years, the ritual was said to be reopened by someone who had inherited the knowledge through generations. Aska didn't believe it. To him, it was all just a myth. A folktale exaggerated to scare the younger generation from carelessly entering the forest. But one thing that made him curious was the news of 3 missing university students from Georgia a few weeks ago. They were making a documentary about the forbidden forest, then vanished without a trace. Their tent was found torn, dried bloodstains were on the ground, and a damaged camera was near a large rock. Aska felt challenged. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed that something was being hidden, and he wanted to prove it that very night. With his old jeep, Aska arrived at the edge of the village around 9 in the evening. The air began to cool, and a thin fog enveloped the path leading to the forest. The villagers warned him, asking him to cancel his intention, but Aska pressed on. He set up a small tent near the forest entrance, prepared his equipment, and started recording. Hello everyone, this is Aska. Tonight I am in front of Alas Selo Domes. This forest has had a bad reputation since the time of the kingdoms. They say it was once a place for wealth rituals, human sacrifices, and a portal to another world. I will go in alone with no backup. We will see if the stories are just tales, or if there is something truly real. He turned on the infrared camera and the temperature detector, then put on his headlamp. The clock showed 11 at night when he stepped onto the path that cut through the forest. His steps were steady, tracing the damp dirt path and the roots protruding from the ground. The sound of crickets and night birds was heard occasionally, but the deeper he went, the quieter the forest became. Too quiet. There was no sound of wind, no sound of breaking twigs, only the sound of his own footsteps, as if reflected by the surrounding darkness. The thermal camera showed a drastic temperature change in one spot. The temperature dropped from 25 degrees to 0 in a matter of seconds. Aska stopped, pointing the camera forward. In front of him, a large tree stood tall, with a tattered black cloth wrapped around its trunk. Under the tree, there was a large round stone, as if it had once been used as an altar. His heart rate increased. He approached slowly, recording every step. The sound recorder captured a strange frequency, a soft hissing sound mixed with incomprehensible whispers. Aska looked at the camera screen and saw a black shadow move quickly behind the tree. He turned around, shining his flashlight, but no one was there. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him, fast, heavy, and stopping right at his back. He turned. A strong wind blew from the north, sending leaves flying. Aska looked at the ground and found a strange symbol drawn very neatly, a circle with a pattern like a thorny star, and in the center, a dark red stone he hadn't noticed before. He stepped forward, accidentally stepping on the symbol. Suddenly, the earth seemed to tremble. Strange voices echoed from behind the trees. The sky turned reddish. Fog appeared out of nowhere, thick and cold. Aska felt his body being pulled by an unseen force. He tried to move but couldn't. Everything around him spun, blurred, then went completely dark. When he opened his eyes, everything had changed. There were no more tall trees or the sound of crickets. No more camera, no sound of electronic devices. Aska found himself standing on a wide stone courtyard, illuminated by large torches burning on the right and left sides. Around him stood people dressed in coarse cloth, their heads covered with dark turbans. Some carried spears, others stood still holding clay jugs. Aska was frozen. He knew very well, this was not a documentary location, nor a film set. This was no longer the year 2025. A tall man in a black robe stood in the middle of the courtyard, looking at Aska with a cold stare. His gaze was sharp, as if penetrating his mind. "Who are you? And how could you enter without permission from the Guardian?" Aska tried to speak, but his throat was tight. He fumbled in his pocket, trying to find his phone or any other device, but everything was gone. Even the clothes he wore had changed. He was now wearing coarse cloth like the inhabitants around him. One of the turbaned men stepped forward and raised a wooden staff, drawing a symbol on the ground. The same symbol he had stepped on in the forest. From behind a stone wall, an old woman appeared with her eyes covered by a red cloth. She chanted a prayer or a mantra in a language he didn't understand, yet somehow the sound was very familiar to his ears. "You are not from here, but you have trespassed. Time does not like to be disturbed," the woman said without opening her eyes. Suddenly, the ground rumbled. From within the drawn circle, a black shadow in human form emerged, but its body was smoky and it had no face. The creature moved slowly, approaching Aska, who was now completely unable to move. In that instant, Aska realized he had made a grave mistake. Not only had he entered a forbidden place, but he had opened a path that should have been locked forever. He had crossed time without permission, without a guardian, and now he stood in the 13th century, right in the heart of the darkest wealth-seeking ritual in Javanese history. From a distance, the sound of a stone bell tolled. The people began to form a circle, burning incense, and raising their hands to the sky. A black goat was tied in the middle of the circle, its body shivering in fear. And behind Aska, the large stone with a red indentation began to glow. Aska wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He could only watch, becoming a part of the dark history unrecorded in any book. And that night became the beginning of an adventure that would change his life forever. The tolling of the stone bell echoed loudly, seeming to originate from the deep bowels of the earth. The echo made the ground tremble slightly. Aska looked around, his body unable to move. His eyes forced to witness a scene that grew increasingly surreal. The men in black turbans began to chant in low, repetitive tones, in a language Aska did not recognize. However, the sound felt as though it was piercing his skull, like a slick whisper crawling beneath the skin on the back of his neck. A young black goat with blazing red eyes was dragged forcibly to the center of the stone altar. The goat bleated loudly, but its legs were bound with coarse palm fiber, and its front leg was broken. Blood dripped from its mouth. Around it, dozens of bare-chested men began to form a semicircle. Some carried clay jugs filled with a dark liquid. The sharp, fishy, and rancid smell stung the nose. At the head of the altar stood an old man with skin as wrinkled as tree bark. His face was covered with a red cloth. Only his mouth and long white beard were visible. He held a staff made from a deer's horn. From its tip hung yellowed human teeth. The old man raised his hands high to the sky. The sky, initially pitch black, now turned a fiery red, as if it were burning. The stars vanished, and a single bright point appeared in the center of the sky, pulsating like an eye. The eye slowly opened, pitch black, with a blazing red line around it. Aska held his breath. His eyes didn't blink, his throat was dry, and his knees felt weak. He realized this was not just a ritual. This was a summoning, and the eye in the sky was not a star, but an entity. Something far older than civilization, far darker than the night's gloom. The blind old woman stood before the altar, her body trembling. Her hands clutched an offering, and she began to chant a prayer in a high-pitched tone. The sound she produced was not human. It sounded like the voices of two different beings overlapping from one mouth. The mantra shook the air, and from the ground, black smoke began to emerge, forming misty hands that crept across the altar's surface. Aska began to feel something strange in his body. His back grew hot, as if it were being burned. He tried to reach for his back and felt something like a carving forming on his skin. The same symbol that was on the ground earlier was now formed on his own back. He had become part of the ritual, without realizing it, without wanting it. One of the misty hands seized the tied goat, lifting it high into the air. The goat bleated loudly, screamed, and then its body was torn in two in midair. Its blood splattered onto the altar, and fire suddenly erupted from within the stone. The flames formed the face of a demon, large and dark, with curling horns and empty eyes. A voice from the fire boomed, heavy and deep, vibrating through Aska's spine. The sacrifice is accepted. The first blood opens the gate. Who brought the guest from the future? Everyone present fell silent. Their heads were bowed. Not one dared to answer. Then one figure slowly raised his hand, pointing towards Aska, who was still frozen in place. He who walks without guidance. He stepped in when the gate was not ready. He carries the light of an age we do not know. The fiery eyes turned to Aska. In an instant, his body was lifted from the ground. He floated, helpless, and was pulled to the center of the altar. An incredible heat enveloped his body. The camera that had been hanging around his neck burned to ash. The edges of his coarse clothing began to catch fire. "Return to your origin, or you will perish with this blood," the voice said again. "I don't know how," Aska thought in a panic. He couldn't speak, but his thoughts seemed to be readable by the creature. "Someone must redeem the path back. Someone must take your place. If not, you will become the eternal guardian of this ritual." Aska looked around. Everyone knelt again, their faces blank, their eyes entirely black. Not one looked at him with pity. He realized that the only way back to his time was through an inhuman act. He had to offer another life as a substitute. Then the fiery eyes began to shrink. The sky returned to darkness. All the lights went out. Aska fell to the ground. Everything was silent, but he was no longer on the stone courtyard. Now he lay on the damp ground, under the same large tree in the Celodomus forest. His body was covered in mud. His clothes were torn, and the symbol on his back still burned. The night was still ongoing. The fog was still there, but there was no chanting, no people in turbans, no burning torches. Only one thing now stood before him. A tall figure, with a face that was half skull and long hands, stared at him from behind the fog. "You are not yet free. You have only been sent back to choose. Return to the present, or remain here with the blood. The night is not over, O time crosser." Aska scrambled backward, his breath heavy. He looked to his right, then to his left. The forest seemed to have returned to normal, but he knew something had changed, and the ritual had only just begun. The air in Alas Celodomes returned to normal, but Aska knew that what he had experienced was no dream. His body still trembled. His breath came in ragged gasps, and the hot symbol on his back still felt like it was scorching his skin. A cold sweat ran down his face as he sat weakly under the tree that had been used for the ritual. The flashlight on his chest was dead. His camera was destroyed, and the night felt more silent than before. From within the fog, the tall creature stepped out. Its body was draped in a tattered robe. Its face was half human, half skull, and two horns curved backward from its head. Its eyes were a deep, lidless red, and each step it took seemed to press the surrounding air, making it heavy. The creature's voice did not come from its mouth, but was heard directly inside Aska's head. A voice so deep and cold it felt like it could freeze his blood. "You have entered a hidden path of time. You have crossed the doorway between eras without permission from the dimension's guardians. You are an anomaly, Asuka. I didn't want this, Asuka thought, trying to stumble to his feet. No one ever does. But when a foot steps on the old circle, the laws change. You brought a new light to a place that should have remained in darkness. Asuka stared up at the creature. It stood like a towering pillar of shadow, gazing at him without blinking. I want to go home, Asuka thought. But not without a price. You have seen a protected time, witnessed a ritual that should only be known by the Guardian's bloodline. You are not just a witness, but an intruder. Time will keep dragging you back if you do not make a pact. What kind of pact? You must bring balance. A life for a life. Soul for the door. Someone must take your place. Someone from the same time as you. Asuka shook his head violently, his face pale. His mind rejected the idea, but his heart knew he had no other choice. If he didn't do it, he would forever become a part of this forest, or worse, become the altar's guardian, trapped between times. You have 3 days. If you do not bring a sacrifice, time will call you back. And when that happens, no door will ever open for you again. The creature vanished into the fog, leaving behind the scent of damp earth and a stinging smoke. Asuka collapsed to the ground. He didn't know who to believe. All his equipment was destroyed. He clutched his chest, feeling his heart pound, with only one thought in his mind. How could he find someone to bring as a replacement? With weary steps, he made his way out of the forest. He had even forgotten the original path, but somehow his steps felt guided. The underbrush seemed to part on its own, clearing a way for him. He returned to his tent, which was still intact, as if untouched. But he knew time had shifted. His phone was in his bag. When he turned it on, there was no signal. The clock showed 2 in the morning. He tried to open the video files from the backup camera in his bag, hoping there was something he could salvage as proof. But when he played them, all the files were corrupted. Only blurry images, the sound of chanting, and the moments he stepped on the symbol. Morning approached. The sky reddened, and the birds began to sing. The atmosphere seemed normal. Villagers started to leave their homes. Asuka decided to return to the village. He didn't speak to anyone. He just washed up at the local prayer room, changed his clothes, and then hired a motorcycle taxi back to the nearest city. The first day passed. He sat in a coffee shop, watching the vehicles go by. His face was blank, his mind busy searching for a way out. Could he bring himself to drag someone else into a world that couldn't be understood? But if he didn't, he himself would vanish. All his documentation was lost. He alone knew that he had stood on a blood altar of the past. That night, Asuka returned to his rented room in Jogja. He stared in the mirror. On his back, the symbol was still there, as if burned into his skin. Its color was a dark red, blackening at the edges. Sometimes it seemed to throb on its own. When he slept, he dreamed he was on the stone courtyard again. The same old woman's voice kept murmuring the mantra in his ear. You are still on the clock. No substitute who has not yet paid. On the second day, Asuka tried to contact some of his fellow ghost hunters. He wanted to know if anyone had ever experienced something similar, but none of them could be reached. Their phones were off, or his messages went undelivered. On the second night, Asuka heard a knock on his window. Softly, then louder. He opened the window, but no one was there. Only a thin fog hanging outside. However, in the reflection on the window pane, he saw the shadow of the horned figure, standing still, watching. Time is almost up. The voice echoed again, sharper this time. In that instant, Asuka began to think about contacting one of the people he despised most. Someone from his past who had destroyed his reputation when he first started creating content in the supernatural world. Someone who didn't believe in the mystical and had once pitted the community against each other with false accusations. Rafi. The name flashed in his mind like a lightning bolt. A man who was always desperate for fame, full of arrogance, and cared nothing for anyone's safety as long as he went viral. Asuka knew if anyone deserved to be a sacrifice, It was probably Rafi. He opened social media, searching for Rafi's account. It turned out he was holding a meet and greet with his followers at a mall in Jogja. Aska gave a wry smile, not of pleasure but of desperation. He didn't know what he was planning, but the deepest part of him knew that this choice would change everything. The mall was crowded, filled with the cheers of young people and loyal fans queuing just for a photo or an autograph. Amidst the roar of music and the bustling visitors, Aska stood behind a concrete pillar, wearing a dark hoodie, a cap, and a mask. His eyes were sharply focused on one person, Rafi, a man with a dapper style, gold-dyed hair, and a fake smile that never left his face. Behind Rafi, two assistants were busy with cameras, recording his every move to be uploaded to his account. Aska tightened his grip. His stomach churned not from fear but from disgust. Rafi had once been his friend on a supernatural exploration team. But for the sake of content, out of envy and a desire for a quick rise to fame, Rafi had spread a fake recording, accusing Aska of faking evidence of an apparition. Aska's career was nearly destroyed. And now, that man was shining on a foundation of lies. This might be a just punishment, Aska thought. After waiting for the crowd to disperse, Aska slipped into the underground parking area. He knew Rafi would be heading there, as he had seen his assistant park the car near the west exit. He hid behind an old, abandoned sedan, waiting for the right moment. Before long, the sound of footsteps approached. "Sue, get the tripod from the trunk. I left it there." Rafi's voice was heard. After that, footsteps drew closer. Aska emerged from the shadows. "Hey, Rafi!" The man was startled, his body reflexively recoiling. His eyes narrowed, trying to recognize Aska's face behind the cap and mask. "Aska. My God, I thought you'd moved to Kalimantan," he said with a laugh, but it was a hollow one, full of caution. "I need to talk, just the two of us." "About what?" "About the truth. About the world you've always called fake. I found something and I think it's perfect for you." Rafi was intrigued. His ego flared up instantly. Whenever he heard the words otherworld, or anything that could become viral material, he couldn't resist. Before Aska continued, he took out his phone. Although all his previous recordings were corrupted, one short video had reappeared from somewhere. The seconds he crossed the circle symbol, then a red light splitting the sky. The video was only 10 seconds long, but it was enough to pique the curiosity of anyone who saw it. Rafi looked at it, then let out a small laugh. "You faked this. The visual effects are pretty good. I don't need your validation. I just want to know. Are you interested in coming back to that forest with me? Just for one night?" Rafi fell silent. Then he shrugged. "Okay. If you're ready to prove it, I'm in." The clock showed 9 at night as Aska's old jeep sped towards Las Celodomas. Rafi sat beside him, recording the journey with a mock-brave narration. Aska remained silent. In his mind, the voice kept echoing. "Time is almost up. The eye in the sky is half open. Only one more step to fulfillment." They arrived at the edge of the forest at exactly 10 o'clock. The atmosphere was far more menacing than before. The fog had started to descend earlier, and even the sound of crickets had vanished. Rafi was still joking around, recording himself in a mock-heroic style. But Aska knew it wouldn't be long before all of that was shattered. They entered the forest. In front of the large tree with the black cloth, Rafi suddenly stopped. "What is this? Why? Does the atmosphere feel different?" Aska didn't answer. He knew that spot was the entryway. "Step into the center of that circle, Rafi. Record everything. If you really want to go viral, this is it." Rafi looked at the faint symbol on the ground, barely visible through the dew. He laughed, nodded, and stepped forward. The moment his foot touched the center of the circle, the earth trembled. The fog turned into black smoke. The trees swayed wildly, and a sound like 1,000 mouths chanting mantras thundered from all directions. Aska stepped back, his body pushed by a strong wind. His eyes widened as he saw Raffi slowly lifted into the air. His body floated, then crashed down hard in the middle of the stone altar. The sky turned red. The great eye opened in the heavens, and the voice, now familiar to Aska's ears, echoed once more. The door has been paid for. One soul, one journey. Aska. Your time is not yet over. Aska was aghast. He thought that after handing over Raffi, everything would be finished. But the voice was different, deeper, colder. You entered without a pact. A pact requires your blood, not just a substitute. Aska wanted to run, but his body was locked in place. His feet were stuck to the ground. Blood flowed from his own palms. He felt his body merging with the earth. The symbol on his back glowed brightly, forming a red beam into the sky. Raffi screamed. His face contorted. His body swelled, then shrank. His hair fell out. He transformed into a faceless figure, then vanished into smoke. Suddenly, the horned creature appeared again. You have paid with the wrong life. Pact requires balance, not hatred, not revenge. Your choice was flawed, so the way home is closed. Aska fell to his knees. His body began to freeze. Around him, the stone altar transformed into a black dome. The faces of the past emerged. The guardians, the crossers, all who had ever tried to enter and failed to leave. That night, Aska knew. He had become part of something older than history, darker than night, and there was no way back. But one last voice was heard before everything went dark. Night fell as a fog slowly descended, blanketing the dense forest. The sound of crickets filled the silence, occasionally pierced by the ear-splitting shriek of a night bird. The sky looked like a gray cloth covering the starlight. It was in that darkness and cold that the steps of Wahyu and his team began to falter. They still hadn't found a way out. The digital compass was broken, and the GPS just spun erratically. But what made Wahyu's heart pound the hardest were the faint voices that seemed to be calling his name. Uhu, uhu. The voice was faint, like a whisper of wind passing close to his ear. But he wasn't the only one who heard it. Daika, who walked at the rear, suddenly stopped and said in a hoarse voice, "Bro, someone just called my name. Did you hear it too?" Wahyu nodded. The three of them exchanged glances. No one wanted to admit they were scared, but their faces betrayed an anxiety they could not contain. They realized this was no ordinary forest. Something was watching, something was toying with them. The deeper they ventured, the aroma of incense began to sting their noses. The ground, which had been solid, now turned wet and muddy. The leaves on the trees moved slowly, as if touched by something from within the darkness. Wahyu, who was usually reckless, felt he had to be careful this time. He raised his hand, signaling them to stop. The three of them crouched behind a bush and peered through a gap in the trees. Right in front of them, they saw a figure in a white robe standing facing a large rock. Around him were 5 people dressed all in black, sitting cross-legged with their eyes closed. On top of the rock was a bowl filled with blood that was still fresh. In their midst lay the carcass of a beheaded black chicken. Wahyu held his breath. His eyes stared intently at every movement unfolding before them. This ritual was no joke. This was the kind of wealth-seeking sorcery they had only ever heard about in stories from their elders. But now they were witnessing it with their own eyes. A pesugihan ritual from the forests of central Java. The ritual leader began to chant a mantra in ancient Javanese. The words sounded heavy, as if they came from another world. Each time the mantra was recited, the flames of the torches circling them flickered strangely, like living things that were dancing. One of the men in black raised both his hands to the sky, then slowly sliced open the skin on his own chest with a small knife. Blood poured out, soaking the ground and the rock where he sat. Daika nearly screamed at the sight, but Wahyu quickly covered his friend's mouth. They couldn't make a sound. If they were discovered, there was no guarantee they would get out of this place alive. The ritual continued. The white-robed figure lifted the bowl of blood, then poured it onto the ground while uttering a single name. Kjai Seton, alas. As soon as the name was spoken, the ground beneath their feet trembled slightly. The fog thickened, and a strange laugh echoed from behind the trees. The atmosphere instantly turned terrifying. From within the fog, a large shadow emerged whose form was indescribable. It had the head of a buffalo and the body of a man, but it was legless, floating in the air. The creature moved towards the ritual circle and let out a low sound that resonated throughout the forest. Wahyu trembled. He wanted to run, but his body felt as if it were being pulled to the ground. His legs were heavy, his hands were cold, and his vision blurred. Beside him, Daika began to repeatedly pray for forgiveness, while Anto could only shut his eyes and hold back tears. The creature opened its mouth, then inhaled the vapor from the freshly spilled blood. After that, it spun around once and vanished straight into the ground. The atmosphere fell silent again, but it was even more menacing than before. The ritual leader bowed his head, then said in a hoarse voice, "The pact has begun. The offering must be fulfilled. If not, your own lives will be the sacrifice." Wahyu couldn't take it anymore. He signaled to Daika and Anto to slowly back away. But just as they were about to turn, the sound of a twig snapping was heard from behind. They whipped around. A tall, large figure stood right behind them. Its eyes glowed red, its skin was covered in burn-like wounds, and thick black blood flowed from its mouth. It was not human, and it was not part of the ritual. It was the guardian of the forest. Without a second thought, Wahyu threw his camera to the ground and yelled, "Run!" The three of them ran with all their might, heedless of their direction in the forest. They didn't care about branches scratching their bodies or mud slowing their steps. The only thing that mattered was getting away from that horrifying figure. But the sound of the creature's steps never faded. It was as if it were floating right behind them, hunting them relentlessly. Even the wind seemed to move against them. Wahyu glanced back for a moment, and what he saw was the creature's face getting closer, so close that he could feel its breath on his neck. But suddenly the sky thundered. Lightning struck a large tree near them. The flash of light blinded them, and when their eyes opened again, the creature was gone. The three of them were silent, breathless, bodies covered in wounds, but they were still alive. They sat on the ground, looking around. The fog began to thin. The sounds of the forest returned, softer this time, as if signaling that they had crossed a boundary. Wahyu looked up at the sky, then turned to his friends. "We're not done. We have to find out why we were able to enter the past, and who opened this gate." And at that very moment, from behind the trees, an old man in a white robe with a wooden staff emerged. He looked at the three of them with a deep gaze, then said,